All right, we are going to practice some graphing here, and we've got three different functions here. We know they're all linear functions. That's all we're going to study. And so what we want to do is we want to pick the points and then plot those points on a graph, and then we're going to make a line. Okay, so you might want to get your ruler out handy when you're doing this. Practice along with me in the video. Okay, so we're going to go through this. We're going to complete a table. And this is called graphing using a table. But there are other ways that we can graph. Later on we'll talk about that. We're going to start with a table. Now basically what we do when we graph a table is we're going to choose some inputs. Now let me just label that. These are the inputs here, the x values. These are the inputs. And see what the outputs are. Those are the y values. These are the outputs, right? But we should probably choose wisely. Like, I don't want to choose an input that's like 1,000,000. Because I'm not going to find that on the graph. That's silly. And there's one input that I really emphasize that we always choose. We always choose. If you think about what would be the easiest input to figure out. Okay, what if so when I'm talking about input, I'm talking about substituting, right? And I'm keeping this blue here. If we substitute 0 here, okay, what's going to happen? Well, that's pretty easy. 3 times, if I input 0, that's going to be equal to 3 times 0 and then minus 2. Alright, so this is just 3 times 0 is 0, minus 2 is negative 2. See how easy that was when we substitute 0? Another thing that's really important with that is, this is my y-axis here. It's my x-axis. Okay. Now, with the exception of vertical lines, every single line is going to cross the y-axis. Think about that. If a line is vertical, yeah, it's not going to cross the y-axis. But if I tilt it even slightly one way or the other, it's going to cross the y-axis somewhere. Maybe it's really far from this graph. It's right out of the picture, but it's somewhere there. Okay. Now, when it crosses, so let's say it crossed right here. It crosses, the x value is going to be 0 something, right? If it crosses here, what's the x value? The x value is 0. So when I substitute 0 in for x, that tells me the y intercept where it crosses the y-axis. And that's going to be important as we go further on in this unit. Oops, I don't want that. I don't want to get rid of my graph. Alright, so being very careful not to mess that up. Let's just go ahead and plot the point that we have. Okay, so that was at negative 2 right here, right? I'm going to use this tool here. So this is my output, which was 0, negative 2. Alright. Okay, now another value, you want to probably go into the negatives here. So like, we could go with even just negative 1, okay, and then maybe positive 1. Alright, so let me change my outputs here. So I'm going to put them in red. So again, 3 times my input, 3 times the x. X is the input, right? Negative 1 minus 2. So 3 times negative 1, that would be negative 3. Negative 3 minus 2 is equal to negative 5, right? So when my input is negative 1, so negative 1 going this way, right? My output is negative 5. So let me go down here. Oh, negative 2, 4, 5 right here. So this is my other, when my input is negative 1, my output is negative 5, okay? Now, how many lines, or how many points do we need to make a line? Technically, we only need 2, but if we did make a mistake on that, I would like to do another point just to make sure these lines match up. And if they don't, then I know I made a mistake somewhere. I can go back and check. If they all line up, the chances are I did it right, okay? So the other input was 1. So 3 times 1 minus 2 is equal to, 3 times 1 is 3. 3 minus 2 is 1. So the input is 1, the output is 1. That one's pretty easy right there, right? So this is at 1, 1. Okay. Then what I want to do is I want to take my, well, in this case I have a drawing tool, so I can insert a drawing tool. Okay. And let me just make that in like a different color, like, I don't know. So I'm going to start here, and I can spread this out a little further. Okay. And what I want to do, maybe I'm going to make that a little thinner, maybe right there. I'm going to change the color to like green. Okay, I can spread that out. So you'll be using a ruler for this. I would suggest using a ruler. Alright, so that's what my graph looks like there. Okay, let's just scroll up so we can conclude this. There we go. Alright, so let's do this process again. And again, I'm going to use blue for my inputs and red for my outputs. Okay, notice that the slope is positive 3. That's pretty steep. And notice this y-intercept, that was at negative 2. So see, you're going to start noticing some things as we go along. Alright, so let's go choose some inputs. Again, if I have an integer here as my slope, it doesn't really matter what my inputs are, but I would like to choose smaller ones. So I'm going to put a 0 here again. Let's get started with that one. So negative 2 times 0. You know what? I'm going to change this to red. I like red better there. Alright, so negative 2. My input is 0. So when I say input of 0, the x value is 0. So I'm going to substitute 0 for x. X and input, they mean the same thing. Okay, so 0 times negative 2 is 0, so that's just equal to 1, right? It always equals this number here when you have 0. So where am I at? 0, and so we go 0 and then 1. So that's going to put right there. There we are, yep. And then since this is an integer value, I can just choose negative 1 and 1 again. Oops, let me use blue for the input. Okay, let's go blue again. Negative 1 and then 1. Okay, so negative 2 times my input is negative 1. Now, here's a tricky one. Negative 2 times negative 1, that is positive 2. Plus 1, that equals 3. So when I have an input or an x value of negative 1, so negative 1, my output is at 3. So right here, right? And I didn't label them this time because I don't think we need to. And then what if I have an input of 1? So that would be negative 2 plus 1 is just equal to, right? Negative 2 and then plus 1 would be negative 1, right? So 1 and negative 1 right here. If these don't form a line, if like say I put it, let's say I miscalculated and I put it right there, we're like, what? That doesn't make a line. Then you know you made a mistake somewhere. Okay, maybe it was the previous one, maybe it was the first one, but you made a mistake somewhere, obviously. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and insert my line, and then I'm going to stretch that out a little bit. Oh, I made it big again. Oh, I didn't like that too much. That's good, and then I can change my color to green. I wonder why it doesn't change it to forever. Okay, I'm going to stretch those out just a little. Okay, going through that point. So you're using a ruler for this. You're not going to be using technology, so just get used to that. See, I have the negative slope. When I have a negative slope, I'm going, as I go from left to right, I'm going down. Okay, here's the one I've been talking about. This is the tricky one in the sense that we have fractions to deal with. So, first thing is super easy because we're just going to go ahead and use that 0 value. Okay, so we're going to put 0 in. So that's no biggie. So, when I go to, why did I do that? I want to use the red for the output. I get carried away. My input is 0. That's the easy one. Just get started with that one and we at least have a point. So 0, 3, that is, so I go 0 for my x value and 3 here. Okay. Got the first one. And now if I choose negative 1 and 1, I'm going to end up with these ugly fractions. So what we want to do is we want to look at the denominator, and we want to choose values for the input that are going to get rid of the fractions. So if I for example, a half, if I multiply that by 2, then it equals 1. If I multiply it by 4, 4 halves is 2. Any multiple, so we want multiples of the denominator, right? That's what we want. Since the denominator is 2, we want to multiply by 2 and negative 2. Okay, so let's do that. It's pretty easy. I mean, just look at your denominator and you multiply by the denominator. One is positive, one is negative. So negative 2 and then positive 2. The reason we're doing that is, well, I know most of us don't really like dealing with fractions. And when you put a fraction on a graph, it's really hard to pick where it goes. Okay, so negative 1/2 times, the input now is negative 2, plus 3 equals, okay, the 0 one's easy, right? If we substitute 0 in, it's just 0 plus 3, that's just 3. We already did that. But now we have a negative, so a negative 1/2 times a negative 2, that is equal to, what's always going to undo this division here. So it's going to be positive 2 over 2. That's just 1. 1 plus 3 is 4. Now if I substitute a negative, or so a positive in here, it's going to be a negative. So 2 times negative 1/2, that's negative 1 instead of 1 up here. So negative 1 plus 3, negative 1 plus 3 is 2. Alright, so let's put these inputs in there. When my input is negative 2, so I got negative 2 here. My output is at 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. When my input is at 2, 1, 2 here, my output is just at 2 right here. And remember I said if we don't have a line here, we've got to go back and check some of our mathematics, our multiplication, make sure it works. If it doesn't work, if this is not a line, something's wrong there. We've got to go back and check that. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and do our line here. So I'm going to go through those points. Yeah, I got to figure out how to make it so that it always does what I want it to do. I'm sure there's a way. Alright, so let me stretch that out just a little bit more. Okay, there we go. So those are our 3 graphs. You notice the positive ones are going, and this one's positive. This is the only positive one. It's going up from left to right. The negative ones are going down from left to right. And notice one has a different slope than the other, so this one's not as steep. Okay. So we can go ahead and graph using a table, just choosing 3 points. Start with the 0, go negative 1 and 1, and if it's a fraction, you pick the denominator and do the negative of that denominator and the positive of that. If you get stuck, you could use a calculator, but I don't think you need to do that. Okay. All right. So let's get to practice. We're going to do a few of these in your notebooks. Use a graphing paper, and I'm just going to give you a few to do on your own.